when I feel really overwhelmed or overstimulated in life and my brain's just so full or it's so at capacity, my way of making sense of things around me is through my art and expressing myself through mark making. And I think that is my way of decompressing as well and allowing my brain to be like to kind of quieten down again a bit. Ever since I can remember from being really young, I've always needed to make marks. Like I've always needed to make sense of the world around me through my art. Having my diagnosis of autism only recently has made so much sense as to why I'm so obsessed with painting and creating. And I've only realised that recently because I have big emotions, because I'm really sensitive to everything in the world and life day to day. Then my art is my way of like going inwards, and it's such my own little world where I don't want to be disturbed, and then everything starts to make sense, and then my brain almost feels like it's a reset button at the same time. My artwork is mainly inspired by my experience of being in the outdoors and being outside in the elements, and memories of being in places where I felt really small and the land around me felt very gigantic and dramatic and huge and powerful. And so I think what I've learned over the years about my work is that there's two things going on, and it's like I've got the paintings that come out, they are landscapes, but they're very abstract and expressive. Like I never want to be like, oh, that's exactly that place, because I think everyone's got their own interpretation of a place. And I feel like within my practice, I don't want to box myself in to be like, this is exactly that place, because that doesn't allow me to feel free. So the work that comes tends to be really like I never have a plan. It just comes out when I'm creating, and I feel like it's a mixture of remembered scenes in my head from certain places and environments, but at the same time it's a form of therapy. So I've looked back at certain work over the years where there's been paintings that have been a lot darker, and I'm like, yeah, like I could see that I was a lot more consumed with grief at the time, or felt quite down or sad, and there's a lot more sort of a oppressive feeling to some of them when I felt really stressed in life. And then latterly, when I felt more clearer, or I'm in a different place geographically, there's more space in them, or there's more colours, and I think that that is so connected to my subconscious. And I was talking to someone about this recently, about my art, in terms of like, I feel like it's my subconscious becoming conscious on the canvas, because it's like whatever's going on within, sometimes I don't even really know. Like sometimes I find it hard to pinpoint my emotions or how I feel if I'm overwhelmed or stressed or having a burnout. Whereas when I paint, I can like take a step back from a body of work and then be like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. And I feel like my art is also my emotional language, and it's like my internal world of all these different scenes that come out in many different ways, and they only come out when I'm feeling like I want to create from a place of peace as opposed to a place of forcing myself, because then it doesn't come out naturally. It's like all these scenes are just channeled through my hand and then processed through my head onto the canvas, and I can't imagine doing anything else. I think that I've realised probably over the past couple of years, there's been certain things that have happened in my life where I've been in social situations, or I've shut down, or I'm like physically feeling the noise around me, like to the point where I just can't deal with it at all. And then I'm like, oh, maybe everyone's like that. Or why is this so hard for me? Or why am I so intense and sensitive to lots of different things? And I think when I was really young, I was always like that. But I think in my 20s, I learned to mask and to people please and to repress my natural way of being, and to be like, oh, I should tone myself down again, like all these things. And it's probably been in the past couple of years since I've been doing therapy and learning to accept myself for who I am, and then naturally the mask kind of drops and I'm much more myself. So then of course then there's so many more situations where I'm like, oh wait, this is my behaviour, this is what I'm like, that's interesting. But if I'm honest, like even when I was going for the assessment, I was still like, it's probably not that. I think I'm maybe just a bit weird. Like still totally downplaying things. But since I've had it, I can think back to my whole life and be like, yeah, that makes sense. When I'm out in nature, I feel like my brain gets a massage, that I could just think clearly and things slow down so much more. And it's where I feel like things make a lot more sense. There's not all this external noise that's like so difficult to process in my brain. It's like the noises that I hear are natural and they're slower and they're quieter, and so my brain just enjoys it so much. And I think, again, now knowing that I'm autistic, it makes so much sense why I've always been drawn to places where it's quieter, where there's space, where I can find meaning in the landscape. And I think there's so many mixtures of things. Like I'm so drawn to swimming, to hiking, to meandering, walking through the landscape, to just sitting still in the landscape, drawing in my sketchbook, writing things down, journaling, and just being and observing. And I think all of those different things are the ways in which I fill my cup back up and feel like I can. It's like a feeling of like my brain's like rebuffering. Like I can go into like flight mode because I'm in the landscape and I'm not being sort of drowned out by so many other noises. When the psychologist said to me, Ellis, you're autistic, I burst into tears because I think I'd gaslit myself for so long into just thinking, oh, it's not that big a deal, Ellis. Oh, you're just quite an intense person. It's really difficult for you, but you have to push that down and repress it, or second guess myself, all of that. So when she actually said that from like someone who's been working with people with autism for like 34 years, she said, I was like, oh. So initially I had a lot of tears, but at the same time felt so relieved and validated. But I had to get her to say it twice more to just be like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. So that was really validating. But then since then, there's been a lot of grief that's followed. I think the grief is basically realising how much self-abandonment there's been. But at the same time, I didn't know that about myself. I think it's a combination of like, wait, who actually am I then? And I know who I am, but at the same time, there's so many things over the years that I've really pushed down and masked about myself. And so I think it's almost like when I got the diagnosis, it was a combination of feeling relieved and validated, but at the same time being like, oh, like the journey kind of starts now then into being even like accepting the parts of myself that I've internalized as failures, so that I'm able to be more myself and not tone that down anymore. So I feel like it's such a journey, and maybe I was a bit naive, but I didn't realize that there was going to be so many other feelings that would follow. But I think that's the process, and I'm going to try and be as kind to myself as possible.